1. Dr. Yüksel is recording. If you can all click continue. As a reminder, I just wanted to say, please keep your questions for the end of the presentations. We don't want to have too much interruption during. We will be taking a picture at the end though, so we'll really appreciate if everybody can turn their cameras on. But thank you all for joining. We know that quarantining is hard. It's been a difficult semester, but we hope to learn a lot from our speaker today, which is Dr. Cynthia DeFina. Now the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Arisha. So for those of you who don't know me, I am an adjunct professor at NJCU. I've been teaching positive psychology there for about 4 years now. It's a class that's so dear to my heart. I think it's a really great course. But when I'm not doing that, I'm also a supervisor of special education in the Sayreville Public Schools. And previous to that, I was a school psychologist for about 11 years. So today I'm going to just share my experiences with the educational world, administration, special education. Even as a student, I'm also taking classes much like yourselves. So just managing all of that. I think a lot of this is about being reflective in education. So I think we need to pause a little bit and just think about where we've come in the past, 13 months as, just a person, as a field, and in the state of New Jersey. So I'm going to share my screen with you. So today's presentation is navigating obstacles amid a pandemic with a focus on special education populations and education. So just an overview of what I'm going to talk about today: procedures in schools, screen time, hybrid learning, all of these terms that we are probably sick of already for the past few months, equity, social emotional learning, learning loss versus the learning gap, and then our future educators, our teacher preparation program. How is this going to change with everything we've experienced over the past year? So just the timeline of the school's evolution, because I think as a field, we've completely have changed in the past 13 months. If we think about how far we've come, when we left school in March, and, for those of you that were at NJCU, it was spring break time. You were kind of like, oh, okay, I'm going on spring break, but then we never got back to our classes. So I remember having a department meeting with my teachers. It was regularly planned, but we were kind of getting word that we may have to close the school for about 2 weeks. So some people were talking like, this might be groundbreaking. We may be in the history books when we think about this. And then others were like, we're going to have paper copies, give this information to our students, and we'll be back. But we didn't come back. It really changed. We, would assign some assignments here and there. Every school district was different. From March, though, till the end of the school year, it really was a different kind of setup than where we are at now. So just to be reflective in that, but I think we definitely are going to make the history books and maybe see some of these setups that our teachers have with, this hybrid learning. It's really become a unique experience. So from my school district standpoint, in March, we kind of were like, well, we just will kind of pause for those 2 weeks, flatten the curve, and then we'll get back. How silly of us to think about that now. It's so different. But then we started to use Google Classroom, started to, just post some assignments and get in touch with our students that way. The district then, as we moved forward that school year, we would require a Google Meet once a week just to connect with your students, and then make sure that they're handing in assignments. So we really had to adapt to grading, attendance. All of this was quite different than, what we were previously used to. In July, we had our summer program with our special education students, we were able to actually do this, and we tried to pilot this. So we have, in a typical summer, our special education students, it would be from preschool through 8th grade, and then we have a small class of our lowest functioning high school kids come to our summer camp. So we decided that we would still let them, but we divided them into cohorts. So we had our youngest group, so pre-K through 1st grade, and then 2nd through high school, come on alternating days. And we tried to maintain that distance. And that was very successful. We also, on those alternating days, the teacher would do a virtual learning. So our program would run Monday through Thursday. Say the students would come in person Monday, Wednesday. So those other 2 days, they would be getting a virtual experience. By September, though, things were still changing, and the district did not feel ready to, start school, as many school districts did not. But then by October, we really were looking to our special education students, because just thinking about equity and providing them the needs that they require, we started to open up our schools for these students. And by November, we were able to open up our schools for students that felt comfortable coming back to school. And by April, we have our students currently coming in 4 days a week. Starting Monday, I'm very happy to announce that our district, which is, I think, we've been kind of at the start of the curve of all of this, trying to get things happen. But starting next week, my district will be coming every day, full days. So we just want to get that normal schedule. My superintendent has been a great advocate for, this is our job to educate students. We have to get them back. So in preparation of the fall and just, getting them to the full day, all of these things that have been changed, we're trying to just work with. So just the flexibility of our teachers, our students throughout this process, because it has been a learning experience for all of us. We've really started to reimagine what education looks like now, and just that landscape is completely different. So one of the things that we needed to prepare for in the summer was this shift in thinking about every aspect of the school day. So we had restart plans. So the district had one overall plan, and then each individual school within my district had restart committees who would look at, we had a shortened day, so the bell changing schedule was different. How the students were going to walk the school building. As you can see, these are pictures of our high school, just the, trying to maintain order, water. We were not allowed to have water fountains, so we had to cover those, having sanitation, hand sanitizer, dispensers all throughout the building. These were all things operationally that we had to think about. Even our lunch. So now our students are starting to eat lunch in the cafeteria, 6 feet apart, but early on this was not possible. So we had like a grab and go lunch that they would be able to take home with them and eat, since we were only at that half day. But all of these things that normally were, not that big of a deal before, we had to really look at and change. How are we delivering instruction? What does that look like? Even things like arrival, it's not just looking about, okay, the buses are coming in here, students are entering the building. Now we have to think about temperature checks, our procedures for answering all the questions that if you go anywhere that they ask, do you know someone who's tested positive with COVID, all of that, those screenings, and just the quarantining, all of that communication now. So just another added level to every system, from lunch aides to paras to teachers to secretaries to administration to our central administration, had more and more tasks given to them. So it was really this whole shift in our procedures and policies. And then, thinking about, we're teaching through a pandemic. So teachers had a lot of questions. There's a lot of social, emotional needs, mental health needs, but we know that school is a part of the routine. And this is why my superintendent was such an advocate of bringing our students back, because it's important to have the students have that routine of what they're used to, being around those teachers that they can form relationships, having your peers with you. That's really, really important. And especially during a pandemic, we really needed that, just that routine and something to rely on. It's very grounding. The other thing, last year, when we went home and quarantine, teachers knew their students. They knew what they looked like. They had worked with these students for months. A lot of teachers were nervous about starting the school year, really not knowing who these children were, what they looked like. We tried in my district to have some equity. There was an issue that came up actually over our summer program of a child who was living in a hotel. There were other siblings, and they felt as though they didn't want to be on camera because they didn't want someone seeing where they lived. The noise level, the busyness going on within the room that the student was in. So the district did not require students to be on camera for months in the beginning. This was then difficult. Now we've changed that policy because we see there's a lot of other issues that have come out of not having cameras on for our students. But I think, so then it kind of goes into this deeper level of, there's some teachers who have taught this whole year having no idea what this child looks like. They know a name and maybe like a picture that's associated with their name that they put on their screen, but they have no idea what they look like. So just trying to work our way around that, there was many challenges. So also transitioning this relationship that we know is so important into, a digital or hybrid format. How are we going to do that? So we needed for our screens to really come alive and make it meaningful. It shouldn't just be like, okay, we're here. You really want to have to engage our students. And for our teachers, this was another learning experience. It seemed like every few months, our teachers were asked to do something new and unique. But we did provide professional development over the summer in regards to our mental health, teaching in a hybrid virtual world, just to give our teachers the resources they needed to start the year off. But as the year went, as I talked about, all of the different months and the challenges, it was always something new for our teachers, which I think they all, the biggest award for everything that they've worked for this year, because I know our students and our teachers do a really amazing job. So this is a picture of my son. You'll see pictures of my children throughout. This is him with his preschool teacher. So we know that the relationships are really important in our students' lives. Parents, teachers, peers, these are the relationships that really make us who we are. And the teachers play such a role in our students' lives, both developmentally, academically, and emotionally. So we need to have these relationships, even if it's in a hybrid or virtual way. It serves the need of the teacher, because then the teacher can kind of get their expectations, cultural relevance, and it also helps with that social emotional learning, which we know is so very important. So these are just things to keep in mind. It's not just teaching, it's formulating that bond with the student and even the parents. And I think one positive that came out of this was the teachers were able to really form closer relationships with the parents during this manner because of the constant communication teachers and parents felt very connected with one another. So I think there was definitely a benefit in that respect. And we know that if parents are involved in that learning experience, our students do better. So it's a win-win for everyone. My daughter last year graduated from preschool. Normally the preschool would have this big graduation ceremony, just like a high school and everything would. And though it's preschool, it still was something that she was missing out on. But the teacher still made it special. They came to our house with a little sign, toys, her plaque, and just showing their support, which I thought was really so special for her. And I think even more special than, this big ceremony would have been. At our high school and middle school, we had buses go out to every student that graduated. And there was a group of individuals, a board member, teacher, administrator, go out and hand deliver the diploma to each student that was willing to do so. And I did not partake in that experience, but anyone that said that they were on this bus ride felt this amazing connection, and so special for, our high school seniors that this was the last moment, that culmination. But it just really shows the impact of student success when you have that positive relationship, trying to make every experience meaningful. That's so huge. And we know that relationships are so important just through this pandemic. We talked about right before the start of the presentation of just, being with others. And that's how you get through these experiences. You lean on one another. So it's so valuable to have that teacher-student relationship where you're able to know the person's likes, dislikes, and formulate your teaching around that to be supportive, much like you would in a traditional classroom. One really great resource that I've found throughout this is something that anyone, a school psychologist, social worker, teacher could use within their class, is a feel wheel. So this is just, as you can see, a beautiful picture, and it has different colors, different words, so for different grade levels, to really talk about the emotions, because we have all felt this pandemic in such a way and it's impacted us. And for young kids or even older kids, we have a hard time expressing our feelings. And you want to normalize these feelings because it's been a roller coaster ride for many people. Some people have lost loved ones, lost jobs. It's been, or just the loss of not seeing, your friends and family on a daily, weekly basis. This is a loss still. So being able to verbalize this or identify these things is really huge for your social emotional learning, for emotional intelligence. So teachers could just start their class with, how are you? Just call in a few different students. They can identify even by the color or with the words, but then also we tend to, with our emotions, only identify, we don't have a lot of positive emotions. A lot of it is, I'm happy, or I'm sad, I'm angry. It's these basic, the center of the wheel. These are usually the emotions that we go by. But there's all these other words that we can enrich our language and really express and pinpoint our emotions. So using something like this in a classroom setting is really valuable because it normalizes feelings and it allows students to develop and increase their linguistic just experiences and language. So students can do one word share, one sentence share, picture share, identify maybe even just with one of the colors on the wheel. So it's just a really great resource that, if you're future educators or you're already in education, that you can incorporate into your lessons on a daily or weekly basis. But I think just talking about people's feelings within the classroom is a really great thing, because if your students angry from the get-go, you may avoid certain things, but getting them to say that is huge, because when one student says it, there may be several others that are like, that's how I'm feeling. Oh, that's okay to feel that way. And it really just to normalize feelings, especially during a pandemic when we feel so isolated, is so important for the student and even for staff members too. You know, the teachers, staff members, administration, we're not immune. We don't feel happy all of the time. We feel stressed and, you know, a lot of these other colors than just the yellow. So it's important to be able to identify and really think and be reflective of how we're feeling. You know, if we're feeling overwhelmed or just dismayed or whatever might be the feeling that you are experiencing, but it's a really great tool for students to use and share with the class. So our special education students in my district, as I talked about, you know, we try to incorporate, we try to pilot some of our programs a little bit more with this group first, and then kind of see where it goes. But we looked at this group first because we really wanted the students to avoid too much screen time. And, you know, we wanted to do that for all of our students. However, with our lowest population, they needed so much more assistance just to be on the computer and logging in, even our middle school and high school students. So when I talk about this, if you're not familiar with special education, these are students with, you know, low functioning autism. They may be considered multiply disabled, communication impaired, or they may have a combination of these, including attention difficulties or learning disabilities. So these are our students that really, comprehension wise, are very low. They're having a lot of difficulty. So, you know, to be fair for the parents, they needed a routine. They have their routine. So when that changed, it was very disruptive. And parents, I think, especially in this grouping, became so appreciative of our teachers and what they do every day because the behaviors at home were starting to increase. We saw a lot of negative things going on with the students. So we wanted to get them back to that routine and just start to have things become normal again. And you'll see in the top right corner, I have a little picture story where we would have to explain to our students, you know, how to video chat with other people, why, like how to wear a mask, why you wear a mask, hand sanitizing. So all these things that you would maybe explain to another child a couple of times, we really had to keep doing in order for them to understand the concept. So every little thing, this was extremely new to them, and they needed that assistance. So like I said, in October, my superintendent said, we need to get these students back. So we had about 3 classes at our middle school, 4 classes at our high school, and a lot more at our preschool level. We have with special needs, and then from elementary level, depending upon the individual school, but a range of 2 to 3 classes that we were opening up. Some of the teachers were very hesitant and felt, well, why do I have to go back? And these teachers continue to work from home. So we took the stance, you know, you need to come back. This is your job. If you can't, you have to use the days or the time that the state was giving to give pay. My superintendent, there was one of our teachers remained home for the first month, and my superintendent actually taught that class when the students were in. And that was how strongly he felt that I was going to come in and make sure these students are getting the education that they need. And I'm impressed because he even did lesson plans and I would check them each week, and they were incredible. But that was how dedicated my superintendent was. I actually filled in as we started to move forward and adding more classes because there were just so many staffing needs. There was so many different situations, but we had a lot of teachers out or would have to quarantine. So I taught classes, I taught math, I taught English, I would cover for teachers. So there was a lot of just on the go. I was a para some days. So it was a great experience, and I love working so closely again with the students. But from day to day, you really had no idea as an administrator what I would be coming into on those days. For some of our students that didn't return, because not all of our lowest functioning students came back, they had similar concerns as many other people would. We offered a supplemental instruction. So typically we have home instruction throughout the year. So this would be, for someone that might be very sick or injured, that they're not able to come to the school building. So we would provide home instruction hours after the school day, so that way the student continues with their education. So the school district budgets a certain amount of money each year for home instruction. As we were going through in November, we saw, no one's on home instruction, everyone's home. So we could use these funds to help our students. So we were able to assign students that still needed that continued support with a teacher. So that student was able to come into the school building after the school day, which was still a half day. So there was still that whole afternoon, and get just a few hours throughout the week to supplement their instruction and help them with assignments or just more one-on-one instruction. Because again, as you all know, sometimes paying attention on the computer hour after hour can get distracting. It's a lot. So our students who already have attention difficulties or have learning issues, this becomes an even more challenging task. So we needed to try and find ways to work around that. So this was one way that we did that. We will be finishing up soon with that supplemental instruction, but we've had it, we would have had it for about 6 months that we provided this for a number of students. I would say probably close to 80 students that we were able to provide that for. Hybrid learning. So when our lowest population came back, we were doing hybrid learning because not every student returned. So teachers would have to still teach, virtually and in person to those in-person students. So this became another challenging task. And I even faced it too when I taught for my few months here and there of where do you stand? Do you stand in front of your computer? Do you stand in front of the class? You want to give attention to this in-person students, but not neglect the at-home students. So it's, again, another challenging task for our teachers to try and find that, situation that worked best for them. And as I mentioned, we had staffing issues. We had to hire several agencies to cover some of our teachers, especially at the height of our return and then around the holidays, that New Year's time. These were a lot of our teachers were either still on a leave or were quarantining. So we had a lot of that we needed. So just a lot of things to manage, but I think with our special education population, we've really been ahead of the game in comparison to other districts and what we're doing. So I know now a lot of districts are only starting to think about, more one-on-one instruction or think about what is the learning loss for these students. And for us, we feel confident in the programming that we offered these students. There were, of course, other programming needs that we typically would provide, such as a life skills, where they would go on trips and get real world experience, or helping with vocational or maybe feeding or more hands-on practices. Those kind of things we may not have been able to do, especially virtually. So those are things that we will address over the summer, but overall, many of our students should not be in that category because they were getting their academic needs met. So screen time versus hybrid learning. So as we have with all of our students, our district was able to receive Cisco kits. So these were these kits that had a camera that would actually follow the teacher around the room as well as he or she's voice. And our front of the classroom would display the teacher as well as the students. So at home, you would see everything going on, you could communicate. So this was a really great program that we were able to have in most of our classrooms. But again, you know, teachers coming back and now needing to learn another thing, another technology piece, figure out where they're going to stand, how to manipulate the computer, their own lessons to accommodate this new learning experience for the students. So there's a lot of fatigue with this for our students and for our staff. Being on the screen, even if it's for 4 hours, it's a long time. You need to take that break. And that was definitely something that I think has been challenging for all of us. We've also had to look at the different ways we're incorporating engagement into our lessons. So, you know, things like through Zoom, WebEx, Google Meet, you know, a lot of these have breakout rooms or polling, or even our Google Classrooms, or we also use on-course classrooms. So you're able to see work in real time, and you're able to hold students accountable for the work. You know, if you're on a Meet, saying like, Jimmy, I don't see that you've been in this document yet. I need you to do such and such. So that's been something really positive for our teachers, that they know where the student is at. They see it happening in real time so they can address it with the student. So there's definitely different ways to go about this. And I think some teachers have become so technologically advanced and creative in their ways that they are engaging the students. But like other things, for some teachers, it's become a challenge day in and day out. You know, reading a story, how much engagement can you really do with that? You know, it may be a little tiring for the teacher or for the student after a while. So trying to just make things creative, fun, that students want to engage in that active participation. And as I said, the off-camera issue was something that was extremely challenging and continues to be a challenge for our teachers because of, you know, the way we approached the camera choice in the beginning, thinking that we were being fair, being equitable for our students. But really, I think this hurt us later on, because a lot of times when I go into a Meet or Zoom, you know, I see some students on, but the majority of students have their camera off. So, which is, you know, again, that relationship. I've seen teachers and they've said to me, I have no idea what this student looks like all year. Like if I see him next year, I'll have no idea that that's who, you know, the student was. And I think that, you know, for a teacher, that's very hard just to comprehend, because we're so close with our students and, you know them inside and out. Like to not even have that visual is difficult. One of the things too, teachers are doing, and students as well, that multitasking. You know, how many tabs do you have open on a daily basis? You know, trying to manage your students here at home, Wi-Fi issues, technology issues. Sometimes, you know, Google Meet or Zoom, it doesn't work. A few weeks ago when I was logging into my Blackboard to start my Zoom for my class at NJCU, Blackboard wasn't working. So I don't even know how, but I got around it somehow and was messaging to my students like, you know, here's the link, try and get in. And we all did. But it's just that challenge that some days you're faced with, or just those everyday things of dealing with the multiple tabs, the multiple documents. But I think if we step back and think about for our students, you know, no matter the grade level, they have shown so much growth with our technology. I know for my son, the bottom picture, he's currently in 3rd grade. The things that he knows how to do, early on this year, he had to make his own Google slide with, all about him. And so I showed him how to insert pictures and everything. Now he's like a whiz at this. He, many days, my mother and mother-in-law would be over when they would be home, when they weren't in person. And, they're older, they have not been doing Google Classroom and Zoom and all of these platforms. So my mom would say, Frankie, like, how do you get into this program? And he would be like, Grandma, do. But I think what a great skill. And we'll talk soon about learning loss and learning gap, but there's this whole other learning experience that especially these younger students would have never had before, that we have to also think about and appreciate, because that's really a great skill, because we're also competing with other countries that, are doing a lot more technology wise. So I think this actually puts our students ahead in that regard. So I think that's important to remember. One other piece I just wanted to mention about screen time, hybrid learning. So hybrid learning is when we have our in-person students, we have our students at home. So one of the things too, we encouraged our teachers for our in-person students to kind of give them a break from that screen time is to have paper copies, of if it's something they're reading, writing, it shouldn't all be on the computer, because that was the greatest benefit to our students coming back, to be off the computer for a little bit, to see their teacher. So having that paper copy option is a real value for those in-person students where possible. So equity and social emotional learning. So one of the things that this pandemic definitely did was really uncover the disparities that we have with our educational system, health, economics, even our technology within schools. So this digital divide, and it was really such an experience to see, even in our district, how many students didn't have a computer, didn't have Wi-Fi, so last spring trying to get them devices. So New Jersey had a digital divide grant. So we will now be able to be a complete one-to-one district where for every student, we will have a device. From 8th grade to the end of high school, these devices will be with the student all the time. So they will have their own. And I know just the state of New Jersey has thought about just the bigger picture of all of this, because it's not just schools that are facing this issue with Wi-Fi and everyone being home, but just as a state to have more like hotspots and Wi-Fi areas to have that access for all individuals. But that was something that was really glaringly obvious after a while, that this was so just the access level to people. You saw that immediately. Remote learning also showcased a spike in failures, so our academic success. I think a lot of people are starting to just get tired and fatigued of this output of doing work on the computer constantly all day, every day. So we're seeing a lot of failures. We're seeing students who maybe did really well last spring with it because it was novel. Now everyone's kind of over it. So we're seeing more and more failures that we're going to have to address. And then the mental health services. So 75% students who get mental health services get them in the school. So this whole time, if students have not been back to school, we've been trying to do some kind of virtual counseling, and we have other programs within our school district that provide some mental health services, but they have to participate. And that has been such a challenge because, again, if they have remained virtual this entire time, they may not. If they don't open their computer, a school district can only do so much to keep advocating, keep reaching out, setting up appointments. It gets very tough. So it really uncovered too the mental health needs of our students and the great advantage that our schools provide for this population. Social emotional learning. So we definitely need to readjust our expectations. As we start to return, we don't want to have these punitive practices, but rather, more positive behavioral approach for these students. Because again, just like a kindergartner that comes to school for the first time, you have to teach them the routine. These are the expectations. This is what you need to do. You may have someone coming to 8th grade next year that has only been in the middle school for like 5 months, and they're in their last year of middle school. So you have to really think about that whole learning experience again, where you're teaching them, these are the expectations, this is what we do, because they haven't been here to have that repetitiveness of what's appropriate and what's not. So really just having that slow transition and not being so aggressive as students return in September, or even, if the district comes back sooner. And then just this equity principle, we need to remember to think about how we're engaging with our families to continue that, as I had said, how important and that great benefit that we've had with this virtual piece, that shouldn't fall off the mark as we return to a more normal traditional classroom. We need to think about that whole ecosystem that our student lives in and thrives in, and what we're going to be able to do to continue to have that individual student thrive. We need to make sure that they're physically safe, emotionally supportive, and just have that high rigor for each and every one of our students. It's extremely important. And then, so there's this talk of the great catch-up, accelerated learning. So for our general ed students, we're having an accelerated learning program over the summer to help with this learning loss. But to me, it's not really a loss if you never had it. So for some of our students, especially the end of last year, they may have not even been introduced to a lot of the concepts that were in that curriculum. So it's not a loss if that teacher never presented that topic to them. We're going to see a lot of learning loss for our students. It's definitely a setback, especially for our Black, Hispanic students, students with disabilities, this because they haven't had that consistency in all of that pieces. So the gap also makes it look like, we'll be able to make gains, but in actuality, I think these learning gaps that we're going to see, it's going to take years to get back to the level that we were at. Reading levels, math, all of this is going to be behind. And that's okay, because as I said, there's other positives that we have experienced. And it's not just, it's all of us that have experienced this. Okay, and we will catch up. The government is giving funding for this, which is great. They're looking especially at academics with STEM, literacy, arts, really great enriching programs that many school districts will start to have because they were not able to have that opportunity during the school year, as well as mental health opportunities for our students so we can get them back. Because I think we're also going to see a lot of school refusal when we return and just getting students back. We typically have a nice amount of students that will have school refusal, but I think we're going to see quite a spike in this area for our students as well. But it's just important to remember that, we've always known about some of these issues, but now with this pandemic, it's really amplified our school system and how we can improve in the future. Which brings me to my last slide. just the future of education. So as teachers, as students, it's important to be reflective. It's important for you independently to just think about your journey and where you've come. In my positive psychology class, I have our students write about their COVID experience and what positive psychology intervention that they've been using to kind of get through. And a lot of my students had extremely sad stories, but then you see this great ending of how they're trying to make it better. And I think there are stories for all of us of how you have gone through this pandemic, with your education, because it's been tough. Some people are still working, they're taking all these classes, or they're starting their first or second year of teaching during a pandemic. So a lot of this, I think time is especially important. We need to make time for ourselves. But again, I think being reflective about where you've come can put things just into a better path for, your future and your mindset. We've seen what we can do virtually, and I think it's extraordinary the systems that we've set up. I have joked with one of my teachers because he was very inventive with, his setup. He had a monitor, he had his computer, he had another camera on this like push cart. He had another thing in the back so people could see. And I'm like, this is going to be in a museum one day, like 2020 or 2021, this is what classrooms look like. So, I think we have jumped extraordinarily with our technology advances as teachers, as a profession. But I think it's just important to remember relationships are so important. We can't get rid of that. That is so vital to our educational systems and making our students successful. But also think about it, because I know many of you are students, going into the field of education or psychology, but being reflective on your own experiences. So you now know what it felt like to be a student through all this. And you can use your own experiences to say, this is what I liked. I'm going to frame my lessons this way, or I can still incorporate this. I'm definitely getting rid of this piece. I didn't like when the professor would make us do this. And using that and seeing the value of your own experiences into your future. And I think there will be some sort of continued virtual learning schools in some capacity, just to reach our students. I know previous to the pandemic, school districts were talking about if there's ever a snow day, we could count the day and have our students log on. So there is going to be still in some capacity, all of this relevance. And I think we can still continue to have this in our lessons as we move ahead. So I have some time left, so let me stop sharing, get back to everyone.